Welcome to Black History Matters 2024. This is the fourth installment of an educational series produced by the National Abolition Hall of Fame and Museum. These short educational videos are meant to provide an introduction to topics important to our understanding of Black American history, but also the larger history of the African diaspora across the Americas and the world. I'm pleased to welcome you to today's episode, Eco Warriors, Black Advocates Pioneering Environmental Justice. The rise of environmental activism can be traced back to the mid-20th century, a period marked by growing concerns about pollution, habitat destruction, and the depletion of natural resources. In the 1960s and 1970s, the modern environmental movement emerged as a response to widespread environmental degradation and the recognition of the interconnectedness between human health, ecosystems, and the planet. Influential events, such as the publication of Rachel Carson's groundbreaking book, Silent Spring, in 1962, which exposed the harmful effects of pesticides on the environment, and the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill, which sparked public outrage and galvanized support for environmental protection, helped catalyze public awareness and activism around environmental issues. Grassroots movements, advocacy organizations, and landmark legislation, including the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency and the passage of key laws like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, played crucial roles in shaping the environmental movement and advancing policies to safeguard human health and the environment. Since then, environmental activism has continued to evolve and expand, with a growing emphasis on climate change, biodiversity conservation, environmental justice, and sustainability. Of course, from its inception, Black Americans have been central figures in this movement, fighting for equitable access to clean air, water, and land, and challenging environmental policies and practices that disproportionately harm marginalized communities, a key part of environmental justice. One of the earliest examples of African American environmental activism integrated within the civil rights movement dates back to the 1960s, when activists like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Ella Baker recognized the interconnectedness of racial and environmental justice. In his I Have a Dream speech, Dr. King spoke of the need to address environmental degradation and economic injustice as part of a broader struggle for civil rights and equality. Similarly, Ella Baker, a prominent civil rights organizer, emphasized the importance of grassroots organizing and community empowerment in addressing environmental issues affecting African American communities. In the decades that followed, African American activists and organizations continued to advocate for environmental justice and equity. In 1982, the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit was held in Washington, D.C., bringing together activists, community leaders, and scholars to address environmental racism and develop strategies for environmental justice. The summit resulted in the drafting of the Principles of Environmental Justice, a landmark document that outlined the principles and goals of the environmental justice movement. Throughout the 20th century, African American communities across the country mobilized to address environmental hazards and pollution disproportionately impacting their neighborhoods. From the fight against toxic waste dumps in Warren County, North Carolina, to the struggle for clean water in Flint, Michigan, African American activists and residents have led grassroots campaigns and legal battles to hold polluters and policymakers accountable and demand environmental protections for their community. In recent years, the environmental justice movement has continued to gain momentum with African American activists and organizations leading efforts to address environmental racism, climate change, and ecological degradation. Leaders like Van Jones, Majora Carter, and Dr. Beverly Wright have been instrumental in raising awareness about environmental issues impacting communities of color, advocating for policies that prioritize environmental justice, and the ability of grassroots movements to have an impact. As I always say, though, it is important to keep in mind that though African Americans have contributed to the field of environmental justice a lot, they are still some of the communities that suffer the most from environmental injustice. For example, they continue to face disproportionate exposure to environmental hazards and a lack of access to environmental resources and other structural inequalities such as environmental policies that prioritize corporate interest over community well-being, which cause them to be subject to areas of a lot of pollution sometimes, or even create areas like we see in the southern United States, the Carthaginian coast, where communities, predominantly in places like Louisiana that are African American, are in locations where the oil industry has a negative impact on the community. Therefore, it is important for us to remember that we should center the voices and experiences of African American communities in the struggle for environmental justice and to work towards a more just and sustainable future. Thank you so much for joining us today for this presentation on Eco Warriors, Black Advocates Pioneering Environmental Justice. On your screen, you will see a link to a Google form. The link is also available in the video description, and this form will take you to a survey where you can leave feedback about your experience with the video. Your feedback helps us plan for future events and to secure funding, so we really appreciate it if you can take a few seconds to fill it out. Once again, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you at our next presentation.